back in time. But we are going to have a wonderful conversation with three very eminent political leaders who are in many ways shaping the region as well as global affairs at this time. Minister Penny Wong, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Australia, Winston Peters, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs New Zealand, and Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs India. I would be tempted to ask them to predict the outcomes of the elections in the US this morning, but we're not going to do that. I don't think anyone in the US is able to do that either. So we are going to hold our horses and wait till 6 p.m. when early trends become more visible. But until then, we are going to actually discuss a conversation that began yesterday evening. What could we do together in the region? How could we respond to some imperatives that the region confronts and in many ways has to navigate? And of course, let me kick off by asking Minister Wong, or first thanking Minister Wong for having us back the second time. This is the second Raisina Down under your watch.
And actually, Jai's as well.
Jai's as well, that's right. So thank you for having us here. And we've had a wonderful time. We had a wonderful beginning yesterday evening. We had voices from the Pacific Islands, from BIMSTEC, and we discussed some very important issues. But on the back of that, let me kick off this morning by asking you, Minister, in these kaleidoscope of plurilateral arrangements, I think this is the first time India, New Zealand, Australian foreign ministers are actually going to be on a stage together for the first, and discussing a common future. This is the first time it's ever happened. I may be wrong, but I hope it is because I like first times. But so is this a trilateral that was ignored? Is it a trilateral that's time has come? Is it a grouping that needs to now, in many ways, become more active in the days ahead?
I think it's a reinforcement of the fact that, given the world's circumstances, countries that have similar interests, that share a belief in the importance of regions, a world which is peaceful, stable and prosperous, in which rules are observed. This demonstrates the importance of us working together, and it's been fantastic. I didn't realise this was the first time all three of us had been on a stage together, though, but Winston's nodding at me sagely and he knows everything, so he must be right. Obviously, we work very closely with India in so many ways, through many of the fora in the regions, East Asia Summit, obviously the Quad. One of the areas where we work really closely with New Zealand is obviously the Pacific, and New Zealand, I think, has a really special kind of role in the Pacific that we respect and we learn a lot from. Joe and I have spoken over the last couple of years about engagement in the Pacific, and under his leadership, India is engaging more as well. So given that there's no part of the globe which is immune to geostrategic competition and immune to the disruption that we see in the world, us working together, whether it's through the Pacific Island Forum or in bilateral arrangements with Pacific countries, I think is a really positive development. And I've certainly, since I've become Minister, really been pleased at the trajectory of our engagement with both New Zealand and India, particularly in the Pacific. We've made a lot of progress.
Minister, yesterday we had Chris Bowen speak to us on energy and climate policies, and he did mention that energy and climate are about national security, they're about energy, industrial policy, they're about economic policy, they're about people, they're about everything, right? One thing he did mention was the Make in Australia initiative. Sorry, it's Made in Australia initiative. Make in India, Made in Australia.
Future made in Australia.
Correct. So my question to you is that in the age of these policies which are seeking to promote domestic industry, competitiveness, also domestic economies, how do we ensure that the development partnership imperatives of sharing the gains of globalization, of reaching out to smaller economies, remains at the core of everything that we do?
That's a very good question. And so if you think about it this way, the world in recent decades, in Washington Consensus, etc., the benefits of open trade, the increasing liberalisation of trade has benefited most the world. And if you look at economic development, median incomes, health outcomes through this period, you can see that benefit. In the period through which we're living, driven primarily by, let's be frank, geostrategic competition, disruption in the world that we can see, from Ukraine to what's happening in the war in Gaza, more country, as well as the competition between the great powers, the US and China. I think more countries are thinking about how it is you bring together the economic and the strategic, or in India's, and particularly in India's case, how you focus on your own development.
Mm-hmm.
All of these are driven by that desire to work out how it is we best position in a world that is increasingly disrupted, both by, as I said, by conflict and by competition. I think the important thing for us all to remember, though, is that it's the sort of baby and the bathwater proposition. There are many benefits to predictable trading arrangements for all countries, developed and developing. There is inherent stability in prosperity that is shared, where people all have skin in the game and all can benefit. There is merit for countries which, we're not a superpower, so we like predictable trading arrangements, and that has been actually central to how Australia has developed as a nation and enhanced our prosperity. So through all of these, I think it is important to recognise what we need to do, which is strategically important to us, but at the same time not disregard the benefit of open trading arrangements or predictable trading arrangements to all of us. And that's an ongoing, tension might be too strong a word, but a balance to be made. And it's important, I think, for those countries, for whom those trading arrangements, that international engagement, economic engagement matters greatly, for us to continue to advocate that, because we bring to it a different perspective to the great powers who have very much larger domestic economies.
Deputy Prime Minister, let me turn to you and let me ask you the same question. India, Australia and New Zealand, a trilateral whose time has come?
We have lived through a number of decades where what seemed like a good idea was being quietly contemplated and was heightened in terms of the work we were doing. But more quickly than we thought, what was a good idea is now becoming a very critical idea, and it needs all the unction, all the speed and all the urgency that the geostrategic circumstances warrant of us. This is no time to be having an academic discussion. It is time where, internationally speaking, the rubber meets the road. And our purpose is to try and cooperate and get on with any country and every people, wherever they might be. But we still have serious interest in protecting our democracy, the rule of law, the freedom of movement and the right sort of international discussion when decisions have to be made. And so, as I say, there's far, far more urgency than ever before, which is probably why we're sitting here now, and we'll be doing a lot more of it in the future. Because our interest, actually, when you look at it, despite the disparity of size and difference in, dare I say, geography, we're part of the Indo-Pacific, and our needs are seriously aligned by not just our own internal political and social planning, but also by international circumstance.
Minister, I did mention the elections that are currently underway, but is it fair to actually now start thinking about the fact that we will have to build our own arrangements in the region? And yes, there are elections that are happening which are important, and yes, it's an important partner to the region, but eventually the region will have to build its own undergirding that will serve its communities and different constituencies. And is that region, is the Indo-Pacific now beginning to put together that framework? We did well in the Asia-Pacific age, but is the Indo-Pacific ready to do that?
Can I just say the amazing thing about what's happening in a few hours' time is that if you ask people what's going to happen in America, sadly, so many people will tell you what they want to happen. And none of us should be doing that. What we should be doing is understanding what Mary Bloggs or Joe Bloggs, wherever they are around the United States, wants to happen. If you understand that, you'll know now what the result's going to be. Well, we have to patiently wait because we do not interfere or have a statement, particularly as Foreign Minister, or a view on another country's democracy. But that said, we have to prepare to work in whatever the circumstance with a changed situation going forward. There is more protectionism. The world we once were trying to build on is changing, and we'll just have to react and change with it. Hopefully, as a contributing group of countries to their view, not just being subject to their view.
Dr. Jaishankar, let me come to you. Two obvious questions. The first, of course, is the trilateral, and we had a bit of a conversation on this earlier. How important is it for New Zealand to become more active in the Indian Ocean part of the Indo-Pacific? And how do we actually build a framework from technology or advanced manufacturing or even the other agri and food processing capabilities of the country, in this new partnership?
Well, first of all, Samir, I do want to say, I think to the best of my memory, the three foreign ministers have not sat together on the same platform, so you may have done us a service today. Thank you. In terms of New Zealand, or frankly for that matter, Australia, look, for many years now, they have policies and arrangements which actually bring them up to Southeast Asia. These are bilateral. Some of them date back actually to the 50s and 60s. And the East Asia Summit process has been part of it. Where India is concerned, for us, the look east, becoming act east, and then reaching beyond the ASEAN to East Asia and then to Oceania has been a sort of mirror imaging trend. Now, what were trend lines over the last 2 decades, I think will become stronger and, in a sense, more practical, as Winston says, because the fact is that we all have an interest today in creating some kind of collaborative, consensual arrangement. I think if from this part of the world, New Zealand and Australia and others take a lead, and from our part of the world we do, ASEAN and to a great degree is actually open on both sides. I think that's really how Indo-Pacific is going to grow. There is interest, not just in the Indo-Pacific, I think even for the rest of the world, for this to happen, because what you said about people finding their own arrangements is also true. I think, and this is part of what's happening.
Sure, please.
May I add something when you finish, Joe?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to your do we have to correct
undergirding?
I think the way I think about it is agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk a lot about that because, and this is relevant to the circumstances we also are in now. The region that we want, with the attributes that we want, so don't think about at this stage who might be dominant, but the attributes of the region which we share. That doesn't arise in a vacuum, and they don't arise because some other party determines them. We've got to make that happen.
Correct.
So whether it's the architecture or the collaboration or the work that, I met Joe on my first day as Foreign Minister, and I think this is our now 20th today. Do we count this as 2? Yesterday's 19, today's 20. There you go, we're up to 20. It is because we are very focused on what are the attributes of the region we want. And I think it's important, particularly at a time of great competition, and this is really picking up what Winston said, we all have agency and we have to use it. And that doesn't mean we are determinative, we're clearly not. But we have to exercise our agency as nation states in a region which is changing. And we want to work together to do that.
Dr. Jaishankar, let me ask you the US question. And it's important. I mean, look, I know none of us want to talk about the outcomes, but I'm going to ask you that what should we expect in the region from what is unfolding in the US? What could be the possibilities in terms of the implications for us?
Look, to some degree, it's natural. People would contrast the candidates and their views and their preferences. But for a moment, step back and look at it like a trend line. Actually, the fact is, probably starting from Obama, the US has become much more cautious about its global commitments. President Trump may be more articulate and expressive in that regard, but the reality is, after all, it was President Biden who, for example, withdrew from Afghanistan. It was President Obama who said that, he would be very cautious about committing American troops to any future conflicts. So I think it's also important to look at the US more nationally than just purely in terms of the ideology of the administration of the day. And if one looks at it nationally, there are factors. I mean, it's a kind of a relative power differential. It is a resource issue. There are pressures on resources in the United States. I think when one follows American domestic politics, there are conclusions for all of us to draw. And I absolutely agree with Winston, which is that when we look at the US, we should be analyzing them rather than projecting our preferred outcome or expectation on them. So, and if we are truly analyzing them, I think we have to prepare for a world where actually, the kind of, I would say, dominance and generosity which the US had in the early days may not continue to be the norm.
I want to ask all three of you now a common question. And this deals with the 2 years that we've all lived through. The conflict in Europe, a major conflict in the Middle East, or the war in Gaza, and tensions all around that. And of course, the African continent, we have a significant conflict underway there as well. In this world of the last 2 years, where in many ways the Indo-Pacific project may not be the first idea in the mind of many leaders around the world, how is the region in many ways going to continue to invest in itself? We were the toast of the town. The Indo-Pacific was what everyone started their address by, or their speeches with. It's no longer the first sentence or the first paragraph, or sometimes even the first page. And in that sense, how has the conflict that afflicts the world changed the dynamics of the politics of the region, and the political leadership that is needed to manage the region? And this is a question to all three of you. I don't know, Dr. Jay, you want to start with that?
No, you're right. You're right. I think after 2022 Ukraine and after last year Middle East have in some ways taken up more of the oxygen. But I would still say that you're overstating it a bit. And I know that's your job. So the truth is, if you go to Europe, which all of us do regularly, I think in Europe there is a recognition. In fact, there is a concern that American attention is going to be overly focused on the Indo-Pacific, and it's in fact in many ways the US-China dynamic which is going to be the major concerns. So that feeling continues. But yes, in a way, it's more spread. I wouldn't be too concerned about it because at the end of the day, I think it's the economics, the economics, the technology, the new things which are going to happen in the international economy. A lot of these are going to come out of the Indo-Pacific. So I recognize what you say, but I would be quite sanguine.
A lot of conflict happens because it is perceived by the offender that there will be no consequences, which is rather a key element of concentration for us to be thinking about. And conceptually, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific region, which is the greatest focus of resources and future wealth in the world at this point in time, and likely to go on for a long, long time as well. Nothing really much changes. It was best summed up by, I think, Chairman Mao, this thinking, so to speak, when he said, and most people haven't read what he wrote, but they should read it, but he said, push forward if you strike mush, pull back if you strike steel. So, push forward if you strike mush, push forward further. If you strike steel, pull back. Pretty basic, pretty simple. And a lot of that's happening in the world these days from some military enterprises that think there will not be any consequences. And largely, in many ways, they could be perceived to have been right. I kind of think our worry in the future is to ensure that they do not think that way, because we have been prepared not to go to war, but to ensure that a war does not happen. And that will not happen from peaceful dialogue and all the sanctimonious words. It'll happen by, sadly, when we're lost, whilst we're living on earth and not in heaven, because we are ready to ensure that others are deterred from that action.
So to start with where you began, which was we were the talk of the town, etc. I'm not sure I'd put it that way, but I don't think there's any doubt that the war in Ukraine has taken up a great deal of bandwidth, as well as a tragic loss of life. There's no doubt that the conflict in Gaza has been a great focus for the region and for the international community. So all of that, by dint of space for leaders, for foreign ministers, for polities, means that the focus has been on these conflicts. I think it's important to make two couple of points. The first is that there is a connection between what is occurring and the broader reshaping or disruption of our region. So the war in Gaza has clearly been a very divisive conflict, both in our region and multilaterally. What is occurring in Ukraine, apart from the implications because of the breach of the UN Charter, is clearly also feeding into our region. You see that most recently with the DPRK going to Russia. So they're not separate. I think that for me, the way to, I have this sort of maxim to myself, the urgent and the important, and what it's trying to think about, not just dealing with what is in front of you, but the bigger picture. And what is the bigger picture? And I think it still remains true that the world is being reshaped, and the focus of that reshaping is our region. And that reshaping is being driven by many factors, the dynamic between the US and China, China's strategic stance, where the US, by India increasing its economic weight and its place in the world, and by what is occurring with other countries. So all of that continues, that reshaping. So the challenge for all of us is to try and deal with those immediate conflicts, but never to forget the context in which they are operating is the reshaping of the region and the world, and to remember our place in that and the importance of partnership, whether it's bilateral, plurilateral, or multilateral, to influence the reshaping in the best way that we can.
One of the big challenges that we have also witnessed in the last 2 years has been around the stresses that many of the economies in Asia have been experiencing. The debt levels have been very high. Economic growth has been stagnant because of the pandemic first and now the crises that we are experiencing, but also the limited availability of investment flows for their own development of infrastructure as well as capacities. And is that something that we now need to be thinking about partnering on? Yesterday we heard our speakers from Tonga as well as Fiji emphasize on the criticality of coastal infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure. Is this something which is calling for a partnership between the three of us to step into?
I'll have a go first. Look, investment, infrastructure, these are critical and increasing needs. I think there are a number of ways in which we can look at this. One is reform of the international financial institutions, and certainly we're part of that discussion, and the Treasurer's been very engaged on that. The second is what we can do bilaterally. So we have worked, from Australia's perspective, in the Pacific. You talk about coastal infrastructure, to increase the availability of infrastructure financing, including in partnerships, so with New Zealand and with Japan, for example. So that is responding to a specific need. And then there are arrangements we need to engage in. Jay raised yesterday in our bilateral engagement whether or not Australia and India can work more on investment flows between our countries, and we're certainly very open to that discussion. We've been focusing very much on Southeast Asia. There's a story about Australia's the lack of investment by Australia in Southeast Asia. We want to turn that around. So the government is a very good strategy, which Nicholas Moore did, who's the former head of Macquarie, about how it is we better facilitate investment in Southeast Asia, and we've done a lot of work on that over the last couple of years.
You ask a very fascinating question about infrastructure, because I think around the world, but in some countries in particular, the expected cost of infrastructure has blown out of all proportion of its historic past. And that matter has not been reconciled in many economies, and most foreign ministers most finance ministers are tearing their hair out because of that. But nevertheless, it's important. The second thing is the world is not short of money. It's short of places in which it wants to go and feels safe where it's going to go. And that's very important for us all to recognise. I think the other thing, though, most importantly, is that we've got a philosophical difficulty in a lot of countries which was not there decades ago. In short, you can't use these parallels because people get horrified by the examples. But countries that have invested in the future sweat of this present and future sweat of their people, on the basis it's about not consumption, about wealth creation, have done extraordinarily well, done incredibly well. And I've seen aspects of that, dare I say it, in India. I've seen it in Egypt. I've seen other parts of the world where it's not a new idea, but it's been new in the last 80 years, so to speak. So that's the exciting thing, in my view, that going forward, if we can convince the so-called ideologues that the people's sweat is worth investing in, as long as it's not about consumption, but it's about something that'll be a la infrastructure, 40, 60, 100 years from now, it'll still be there. That's what's critical now.
Dr. Jay, you want to come in?
No, yeah. If I could just add to that, I think a lot of the developed countries and a lot of the big countries broadly look after themselves. A big part of the challenge today is to give smaller countries more choices. When they have choices, they have a better ability to weigh the merits of them. When you don't have choices, you take what you get. So, and if you look around the world, yes, there are big structural issues. I mean, all of that is true. But there are also issues emanating from policy choices which were not prudent of us. To my mind, one difference we can make, and even sitting among the three of us in this region, it's for us relatively a newer region to engage in terms of our developmental contribution. But even in some way, we can add to the overall kitty and expand the choices. Obviously, different countries do. Everybody does what or should do what they're good at. So, in our case, let us say domains like health or education, these would be more natural things to do. But overall, yes, there has to be something other than the market and other than very politically loaded offers to help build infrastructure. And it's part of our collaborative goal in the Indo-Pacific to create those additional options.
I'm going to take the next set of questions to the bilateral. And I want to really explore what's happening in some of the relationships on the stage here. And I want to start with you, Minister Wong, and then I want to come to Dr. Jay before I come to the Deputy Prime Minister. That you started your work as Foreign Minister with a trip to the Quad Summit, if I remember, and I think that was your first day in office. And that's when you met in Japan, if I remember correctly, right? And there's been 20 meetings, you just counted them down, so now today is the 20th time you're meeting each other. What are the drivers of this huge transformation? And Dr. Jaishankar spoke about it yesterday, so I won't ask him this question. But he was speaking about the relationship being perhaps one of the most transformed relationships in the last decade. And from a Canberra perspective, what are the key drivers that are shaping the Australia-India bilateral today?
I think we share... Oh, I like Joe, so that helps.
Okay. So...
I think we share a very clear view about what matters in our region and want to work with each other in order to make that happen. That would be it at its most simple. We can talk about all of the other kind of elements of the relationship. The Australian-Indian community is such an important. I described it yesterday as the sort of beating heart of the relationship. It is such an important part of our connection. But this is a relationship which I think is founded on not just our history, our communities, but a very deep understanding of the benefit of working together as strategic partners in the region and in the world in which we live. I think we both recognise the reshaping of the region and the world, and we both recognise the importance of working with others and with each other to influence that. We're also Quad partners, and that is a very important aspect of the relationship. It has been transformed, I think, certainly in the time we've been in government, but certainly I would recognise also by the previous government. I think there's a bipartisan commitment to the relationship on the foreign policy side, on the strategic side, on the defence cooperation side, on the economic side.
But do you think it's time for now this big, bold, audacious joint project? You have $50 billion of trading relationship, or nearly $50 billion of a trading relationship, right? It's grown over the last few years. And is it time now to think about something really big that in some sense establishes a permanence in the relationship that's beyond the
Well, I think it's permanent. No, I do. I think we... apart from the very close personal relationships, whether it's between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Albanese, or the work that we do together, we live in the fastest changing region in the world, and whether it's cooperation in the Pacific or Indian Oceans and all that means, I think that is a permanent fixture. And anyone who's in these roles who doesn't recognise that, I think, is misunderstanding the nature and the impact and the weight of the relationship.
Dr. Jay, would you like to comment?
On which one?
The big, bold, audacious.
Look, I don't know if you necessarily, that's the best way of proceeding. If you get one, it's great. But I would argue that in what we do is to look for what's the USP of that particular partner or country and see what we can do. And to my mind, big or small is not that relevant. I'll give you a very different example, and you are familiar with it. With Israel. Israel actually has made a huge contribution in terms of drip irrigation in India. So a lot of people in the agriculture business actually know Israel because for them this is a country of drip irrigation. So it can be one thing you're very good at, which applied on a big template can have a dramatic, game-changing possibility. So when I sit with my two colleagues, to me, education comes naturally to mind, because if you look at countries which actually have created a place for themselves in global education, Australia and New Zealand would come to mind. Because there are others who take students, but they have a big population of their own. So the international students are a small add-on. Whereas, these two countries have actually made this into a kind of a global industry. In the case of New Zealand, again, Winston and I discussed it. To me, the dairy sector, for example, they are world leaders in that. And obviously, the nature of the domain is very different. We are sort of small animal husbandry economy. But there are collaborative possibilities, and there are actually some projects which have already started. Now, everything starts small, then you figure out how to scale it up. So once you start looking for partners who can bring some great, something important you don't have.
Something unique.
Yeah, something unique, and then apply it on that scale.
Deputy Prime Minister, does New Zealand see a future where there might be more India in your life? And besides beating us in cricket,
yes, I'm glad you mentioned that.
It's terrible what you did. 3 decades. The Australians tried it for 3 decades.
We're famous for our modesty.
They had an Indian in their life, that guy, the spinner, who got most of us out.
and the batsman.
Yeah, yes, and Ravindra. Yes,
Some of your finest exports.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is it was enormously exciting, because we're talking to a country where we thought we need to get their attention, but we went down the back door and did it, so I apologise for that. Back to foreign affairs and international matters. The truth is that the world has changed, and we have to do far greater cooperation with far greater speed, and so we need some basic fundamental ground rules, not just for us three, but for everybody engaged in our relationship. So those ground rules were followed. But the positive aspect of it is that take the Indian dairy industry. It is based on a model we used to have way back before we decided to go neoliberal and amalgamate everything and make it one big industry. Theirs is where it was when we were the best in the world by far with their cooperatives, but they're small. And looking from the outside, you see things with new eyes, because we can see that there's possibly 40% more food required from those animals in the future. Now, that's down to science now and food. And we think we can help big time if we can get past the fear of the Indian farmer about a country called New Zealand. We can work in our collective interests to take it forward. And on other products we've got, whether it be agriculture, those things, we need to bring those more to the attention of the rest of the world and get greater cooperation. We're small, but if you look at the countries launching rockets into the stratosphere, we're number 4. Nobody knows that. But we're number 4 in the world putting rockets into the stratosphere for multiple reasons, so to speak. What's the moral of the story? Well, the moral of the story is we are not having a discussion here about what we'd like to do. We're having this discussion here because we've got to do it. We've got to do it and get it ready now. That's the world which we face. And if we don't do it, we will have not stepped up to the massive challenges that have been, in many ways, forced upon us.
You were wanting to come in on the cricket part.
I was just astounded.
You were Okay, that is an
Like you said,
appreciation.
we've already spoken about this while we were being mic'd up and congratulated Winston.
And are you
On
going
a
to be kind to
remarkable-
us when we visit Australia, the cricket team?
Well, I was commenting on how hard it is for us to win in India. So that's what makes that
Fair enough.
remarkable.
No, so, and the final part, I think I want to now actually, a few of you have discussed education. And Australia, New Zealand and India, we can say are connected through human bridges. It's our people who connect us quite deeply, and I think that's been emphasized in this conversation a few times. In a world where movement of people it lends itself to political conversations, political contests, politics of certain varieties. How do we ensure that these bridges that have nourished our integration, our engagements, our intimacy as countries, how do we ensure that those remain vibrant and alive? And how do we, in some sense, invest in these bridges in a manner that's useful for the future? Yes.
This is a dangerous place to sit. You get the first question a lot of the time. Well, first you do it by articulating the values and principles of who we are. And we are one of the, we're a country with enormous diversity. It's one of our great strengths. We have one of the oldest continuing cultures on earth in our First Nations people. We have 1 in 2 of us either born overseas or a parent born overseas. We have a vibrant Indian diaspora, and we welcome it. We welcome it. We welcome people of all cultures and all faiths. What we together work to achieve is a society that has that those underpinning values that multiculturalism or cultural diversity require, which is respect. Respect for the rule of law, respect for each other, respect for one another. We're very keen to utilise better the people-to-people relationship, and I see the leaders of the Centre for the Australia-India Relations here today, and they're doing one of the things I said to Swati and Tim was, I want us in a few years' time. I want us to stop talking about the potential in the relationship. Mm-hmm. Great, excellent. But can we please, in a couple of years' time, be able to say we have moved the dial? We have actually engaged with the Indian community here, including the Indian business community, and we have moved the dial in terms of our economic engagement. That is so important, and I'm really pleased with the progress that is being made, so thank you for your work. I think there is a lot more to do, but I feel very positive about where that bilateral relationship is going. And if I may, just digress for a moment and say, Winston, and you've seen it here today, we're really, I respect very greatly the much forward-leaning nature of the New Zealand government's engagement in the Pacific and the world, and Winston's really led that. And he speaks in probably a much better retail politician than I am, but I think he's making the same point about agency. We have to do it, and we've really appreciated working together in the time since he was elected.
Thank you very much for that. It's most unexpected.
That I said something unexpected.
Can I just touch on one aspect called education? Education for us means that we've got to, in many ways, re-examine what we're doing. You know what the phrase in loco parentis means. It means in the feet of the parent. And so when you've got an education connection, say, with India, then we've got to remember that there's an Indian parent back there who expects us to do the best we possibly can. Mm-hmm. No questions. It's not second best, third best, but the best we possibly can. And so we're refocusing our education institutions to say, look, we're offshore, and it's very, very critical that when we're talking to the other countries about our system, the parents, above all, with the hopes and dreams that they've got for their child, can have and place trust on New Zealand. So we've got to step up properly, refocus ourselves. It also means we should have been involved in the new city in India, and part of the education system, which the Aussies which Australia is engaged in, but we're not. And so you say to yourself, how do we miss out? Who missed the boat here? So you go back home and start up inquiring around. You can't see anybody for dust and small pebbles as they try and escape their responsibility to be engaged. So I'm just dealing with the one aspect. Our job is to ensure that for an Indian student coming to New Zealand, they're going to get the best we can possibly deliver. And we're up there in that zone, and we have to be honest with it. We can be there again, but not unless we make some serious commitments again and now. And a lot of it, when it comes down to these things is, how shall I say it, fundamental. I'll just give you an idea how things can go wrong, so to speak, or how you can have confidence for the most ridiculous reasons. When we first engaged with India in terms of foreign affairs and our post in India, we decided there's a man who's climbed Everest. He's so famous, the Indians are going to love him because part of their history as well. So we put a man called Edmund Hillary up there and thought everything will just go fine. Well, it doesn't go fine unless you've got a plan. And we are, sorry to say it, it's not a confession, but we're all over excusing our past. We've just got to get a forward-looking plan in concert with the two countries I'm talking to and going forward. And while I'm saying that, I have to say to you, Foreign Minister, it is a delight to see somebody over and over again from your country, because in the past I've seen a lot of faces on the way through and they kept on changing them. So if you can convince your leader, please stay there for a while so we can get things down the track where we need to get them to.
Dr. Jaishankar, for you the concept of human bridge or the living bridges is in many ways different. In a sense, you are the exporter of talent and of course workforces and large diasporic communities that are creating values around the world. And you personally, I know from reading newspaper reports, have been speaking around mobility every time you're in different capitals. And how is your view on this evolving as you engage with your partners?
Look, Samir, let me make 2-3 points here. One, for Indian foreign policy, I would certainly say preparing for a global workplace would be among our top 3 priorities. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy preparing for a global workplace, partly because we don't know what a global workplace is going to look like. My second point, you use the word, okay, you are in the business of exporting people. I think it's much more complicated than that. If you dial back a bit, if you are looking at a world of deeper technology applications in our daily lives, that will require a certain human resource to drive it. And the reality of the world is human resources are very uneven. So I don't think it should be approached really as who is exporting whom to which country. We'll have to look at the resources in a way as a sort of a common pool and say, okay, how do we optimally prepare these resources so that they are available to the world? So if you're going to have a technology-driven world, you better have an education-driven world. And if we're going to have an education-driven world, it cannot be done nationally. People may be national, but the skills preparation is too complicated to be done nationally. Someone who's coming to New Zealand and Australia, there will be a time in the not distant future, they may not end up staying in Australia and New Zealand. It is very likely they'll come, get their degrees and move on. But we just don't want them to come to Australia and New Zealand. We want Australia and New Zealand to come to India as well. So, we have today a little more than 1 million students, 1.2 million, I think, abroad at a given time. The reality is these numbers are not big enough for the kind of future that the world is looking at. We'll have to get the numbers up in India, on location, at cost, and then prepare it in a way as a globally available resource pool. And that I would argue, if I were to pick one subject really for us to work on, I mean, to me, education would be very, very high. I mean, there'd be others as well. I mean, mining, for example, with Australia, or we have spoken about dairy with New Zealand. But definitely education, mobility, technology, they are part of a package. And they're a part of a package which needs to be addressed together if we are going to be, transformative about it in the short term.
Mr. Wong, I started with you. Final words to you as we close this panel.
Actually, I was just going to thank you and to thank everyone in this hall. Rosina Down Under was, I think, credit where credit's due. I think it was Dr. Jaishankar's suggestion and came out of a bilateral, one of our ministerial dialogues. I think consistent with the sort of my exhortation around agency and working together. That relationship is not just at Foreign Minister, Defence Minister, Prime Minister level. Obviously that they are important. And it's not just at the people-to-people economic level. That is also important. But it does require us each to understand the other's perspective, to identify where is the strategic alignment and where we can productively work together. So I want to thank everyone for your engagement in this. I'm really pleased to see you all here and to thank you for moderating today. Thank you.
Thank you, ministers, for your time this morning and for the wonderful conversation. Please join me in applauding them for joining us this morning. And let me invite Raji to take over. We can step up the stage. We have a colleague.